Tuesday, May 28th, 2019. Will please come to order, and the clerk will call the roll.
Calling the roll, Mr. Tuma.
Here.
Mr. Gallagher. Here. Mr. Schron.
Here.
Ms. Conwell.
Here.
Mr. Jones.
Here.
Ms. Brown.
Here.
Ms. Stevens. Ms. Stevens is absent at the moment. Ms. Simon.
Here.
Ms. Baker.
Here.
Mr. Miller.
Here.
Council President Brady.
Here.
You have a quorum.
Thank you very much. Has anybody signed in for public comment?
Yes, we have one person who has signed in, Rob Loftus.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Good afternoon. Welcome to the committee. You have 3 minutes.
My name is Rob Loftus. I'm with the Coalition to Stop the Inhumanity at the County Jail and Showing Up for Racial Justice, Northeast Ohio. The email I received actually said that there would be something on today's agenda about the sheriff, but I guess either the email was mistaken or I misread it.
This is at the 5 o'clock meeting this evening.
Oh, I can't make the 5 o'clock.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Well, I will put in my 2 cents right now.
You can do that.
I want to continue to urge strong action about the jail and anything that is done with regard to getting a new sheriff or changing the way the sheriff is appointed has to deal with the fact that there is serious endemic corruption surrounding the jail. I am bothered by the fact that people go in there because they have drug problems and then they are sold drugs by guards, right? That seems like it's not actually a way to get well. The people in there have not been convicted of crimes. They are often suffering from mental illness or addiction. And I really, really think that it is important to prioritize treatment in these situations. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Has anybody else signed in?
No, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. We now go on to items referred to the committee, and we're going to consider the 2 items concurrently, so I would ask if you would please read both items into the record.
Resolution number 2019-0125, providing for the issuance and sale of taxable general obligation bonds in a maximum aggregate principal amount of $40 million to advance refund all of the county's outstanding excise tax revenue bonds series 2015, originally issued for the purpose of paying the costs of constructing, renovating, improving, or repairing sports facilities, including specifically major capital repairs to such sports facilities and reimbursing the county for costs incurred by the county in connection with such construction, renovation, improvement, or repairs, to pay capitalized interest on the bonds and to fund a reserve fund and to pay the costs of issuance in connection therewith. Resolution number 2019-0126, providing for the issuance and sale of general obligation bonds in a maximum aggregate principal amount of $40,500,000. To provide funds for the purpose of paying the costs of constructing, renovating, improving, or repairing sports facilities, including specifically major capital repairs to such sports facilities, and reimbursing the county for costs incurred by the county in connection with such construction, renovation, improvement, or repairs of sports facilities, together with all necessary appurtenances and work incidental thereto, to pay capital interest on the bonds and to pay the costs of issuance in connection therewith.
Thank you very much. We are going to have 3 presenters on this legislation. First, Maggie Keenan, our Director of Budget and Management, then Bob France, the county's financial advisor, then Len Komorowski, representing the Cavaliers, and also Joe Snadarczyk, the General Counsel for the Cleveland Indians, is present but is not going to present. He's available if any questions regarding the Indians should arise. Please proceed.
Good afternoon, Maggie Keenan, Office of Budget Management. So I'm just going to give a really brief overview and then turn it over to Bob. But as the clerk was kind enough to read in, we have two resolutions for consideration. Both are debt issues, general obligation debt issues. The first is a refunding of debt that was issued in 2015, payable by the county's excise tax. And the second is for new money to fund approved major capital repairs at the Rocket Mortgage Fieldhouse. So I do want to note that though we are issuing general obligation bonds, which would otherwise be paid for by a revenue source that goes into the general fund, that's property tax dollars, these bonds are going to be repaid by the proceeds from the excise tax. So they are being essentially only secured by the county's general fund. We have no reason to believe, based on all of our estimates at the time, that the excise tax will be insufficient and will require general fund resources to pay off debt service. So I'm going to turn it over to Bob to explain the details.
Good afternoon, Bob Franz with Stifel Nicholas. I'm the county's financial advisor. I prepared a two-page overview that I believe was distributed last week or early today for everyone's review. So I wanted to provide a little bit of background and overview of the process by which major capital repairs at both Quicken Loans Arena, at Rocket Mortgage Fieldhouse and Progressive Field are funded and approved for by Gateway. Gateway is the landlord, not the county. I want to make that clear. And the 2015 bonds were issued to fund major capital repairs as well, secured only by the excise taxes generated by the voter-approved excise tax levy in 2014. We get right into the double issue, kind of the dual issue of the refunding and the new money. And the refunding is being done to fund these improvements as efficiently as we can. And I want to make that clear that these are lease obligations of Gateway, and the only available use of the sin tax, of the excise tax, is to fund major capital repairs or constructing major sports facilities. So we're not diverting general fund revenue at all or revenue from other sources. It's the only allowable use of these tax revenues is for what we're using it for the major capital repair. So we are refunding the 2015 bond issue to allow us to redistribute the excise taxes from the 2015 bond issue structure to the new structure. And again, that is to more efficiently fund the new bond, the new money needs of $39.5 million. So that allows us to refund at a lower rate because of the use of the general obligation security, as well as to fund the new money needs for the lease obligations. And in this case, it is funding lease obligations at Rocket Mortgage Fieldhouse only. There will be no funding working with the two teams and Gateway. It was determined that the Cleveland Indians did not want to participate, and that was up to them. That was in their capital strategy. And again, to more efficiently, so we're more efficiently funding that. I know there's a lot in the two-page overview, but I don't want to get into the weeds unless anybody has any particular questions. I'm happy to address anything that you guys have questions on.
Questions by my colleagues? Councilman Schwan.
Ms. Keenan said that it's going to be backed by the general fund, though, in case of a default? Is that correct? I didn't hear you say that.
Yeah, correct. So the general fund is providing the backstop. We're projecting a decline in the excise taxes every year. conservatively, of about 0.5% a year. And even with that decline, we're still projecting about 1.8 to 2 million, a little over 2 million in excess money of really coverage. So there's about $2 million, give or take 100,000 here or there every year to provide coverage to make sure the general fund is never accessed.
What was raised in the first year in which the excise tax was put in place for the cigarettes?
It was in 2015,
No, the very first year in which the tax went into play.
back in 91,
Yes.
about 17.2 million.
Okay, and then in 15?
In 2015, 13.6 million.
And you're forecasting how much by the end of the life of these bonds?
It is, give you the right number, 12.689 million.
You're saying that those taxes drop 25% from the initial to your 15 number, and they're only gonna drop less than 1/4%? That's hard for me to believe. This. when was it Pell Mell just announced last week that they're going to get out of all cigarette sales? Mm-hmm. I'm sure you saw that announcement, right?
Yes.
They are going to eliminate cigarettes. The company that we all saw as a kid out there.
Yes.
They are eliminating cigarettes from their product.
Yeah, and that there's a lot of volatility, as you might imagine, in the revenue stream. So from 2006 to 2018, we've lost about $1.6 million in revenue from cigarettes, but we've gained about $1.6 million in
alcohol
and liquor.
Yeah.
We've lost a little bit in beer, a couple 100,000, but yeah. Okay.
So sorry, Maggie Keenan, but I did just want to point out that the largest decrease between the first year in 2015 was when Ohio went we went smokeless. So we lost a lot of revenue from the cigarettes, but the cigarettes have been, they had been declining, but they're declining at a much less rate now, but alcohol is holding strong. That's still going up every year.
Thank goodness our alcohol issue. We can be proud of ourselves over that issue. Yeah. As far as the backstop, is that going to impact at all if we have to go out for issues of any other nature in the future? Because this is going to be earmarked, showing that the county would be backstopping this. Should there be a failure on the revenue side?
Anytime you issue debt, anytime the county issue debt or any municipal government issues debt, it goes against some form of a debt limitation. In this case, the county's general obligation debt limitation is fairly sizable now since the property tax reappraisal came in at about 10%. So that increased the general obligation capacity. The ability to issue other forms of debt of the county will not be impacted. So sales tax, revenue debt, excise or economic development, non-tax revenue debt, certificates of participation are exempt from any debt limitation because there's some details there in the code. But will it affect it? Yes. Will it inhibit you? No.
Okay, so the general fund is the backstop, and how much of the general fund have you allocated in your own calculations for potential lawsuits, seeing how we, as you know, self-insure any of those?
I have not.
Not a penny?
Well, I'm not budgeting for the budget, so
Thank you.
I'm sure management budget has.
Councilman Jones.
Bob, why weren't these major capital repairs, why weren't these repairs for the Cavs part of the arena transformation?
I think the general answer to that is these were lease obligations and not part of the transformation project. So there was a distinct difference there between the transformation bonds and the transformation project.
I would add to that the basic concept is that these are basic repairs which are covered under the excise tax, where the transformation project was an improvement or an enhancement that's not covered under the excise tax and has to be funded separately.
Okay. Why aren't the Indians included in this bond issuance? If we know they have major repairs as well, and I believe they've already been approved by Gateway.
Yeah, I would ask Mr. Zendarczyk to address that, so I don't have to
Sure,
speak
you
for
can come
the
on up.
Indians.
Hi, I'm Joe Zendarczyk, General Counsel of the Cleveland Indians. As you correctly note, we're not participating. We did participate in the first tranche, and we're very supportive of the refunding because that will improve returns to the Progressive Field facility in the future. But in terms of participating in the present, we are engaged in our own long-term planning right now, and our lease is up in 2023. We are looking at a number of questions, but the interest in refinancing the money that, or pulling forward the money that, we're currently owed is not there for us. That said, we are supportive of the Cavs and their desire to get a much larger sum of money returned to them.
Are you currently in any lease agreement negotiations with the administration?
Not currently.
Okay. All right, thank you.
You mentioned about the two-page summary. What does that summary look like? I'm wondering if we have that in front of us.
You do not have that?
We have the one item that has the outlines of Gateway's policies on inclusion. Then we have this one that says presented in 2014. Are either of these what you're talking about, or is this?
It is not, no. No, I will make, I can approach her. We don't have it, sir. Okay, I'll make sure, I thought that was.
Could you, okay, could you give that to the clerk and have copies made? Okay. Any other questions at this time by Mr. for Mr. Franz? Okay, we're gonna call up Mr. Komorowski, but after the two-page summary is distributed, if it generates any questions, we may call you back.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Thanks.
Okay, Mr. Komorowski, welcome to the committee.
Thank you, members of council. Thank you. Len Komorowski, CEO of the Cavaliers and Rocket Mortgage Fieldhouse. Just to cover off on several items and open for any questions you may have as well.
And before you start, let me just note for the record that Councilwoman Stevens has joined the meeting. Thank you.
Great, thank you. First of all, as Mr. Franz noted, and know the question as well from Vice President Jones as well, we have a lease as it pertains to our lease with Gateway, as do the Indians, and that lease calls for, and I'll actually advance that slide quickly to help explain it. we're responsible for all operating cost, maintenance, repair, and capital expenses less than $500,000. And the Gateway Economic Development Corporation is responsible for major capital repairs in excess of $500,000. And we have a process we work through, as do the Indians, with Gateway, submit a major capital repair request. At that point, it's vetted by the staff at Gateway along with a third party who they engage to then process that request, verify it, and then that is then brought forth to the Gateway Board. It's also then reviewed and vetted by the Gateway Board, at which point it's either approved or denied as a major capital repair. So that's the process within our lease in terms of that obligation. And then also as it pertains to our landlord's expenses, which is Gateway's, between ourselves and the Indians, we cover Gateway's expenses as well, which is currently about $4 million a year. So that's just relative to the lease structure itself. And the one item that, again, is the obligation of Gateway is major capital repairs, defined, again, as in excess of $500,000. And I think of note, in terms of that responsibility from Gateway, it's silent to sources or any sources in terms of how Gateway then funds that. But if you can recall, and the reason I have this slide up is if you recall back in late 2013 and then early 2014, we were in front of this very body, ourselves, the Indians, as well as the city representing the Browns, or in this case for all three major public sports facilities. And this was an opportunity the community had to extend the excise tax, specifically, again, as a source to be dedicated against these major capital repairs. And then at that point, we testified, the question was made, raised by County Council at that point as to what is anticipated as major capital repairs for the next 10 years. This was actually lifted from that. You can still find this on cleveland.com too, if you wouldn't to look hard enough. And we made the presentation to show, here's what we anticipated. There was a subsequent question about timeline of when these major capital repairs would occur. And as it pertains to the majority of these, they were scheduled to have been completed by 2017, which were 2 years beyond that. So you have a building right now which is 25 years of age. A lot of the items, whether it be the roof or the HVAC system, we've worked diligently to maintain and extend the useful life of those items well beyond, what would be certified otherwise. And so relative to timing, and coupled with the transformation, which is renovation versus, in this case, major capital repair, we're also working and taking advantage of the window where a number of these items are either at failure or otherwise, and executing upon those as well. So that, again, is just more of a give context of these items, of which I'll go to the next slide here, which speaks to what is part of this particular bond issue. Again, these items were referenced in that slide in 2014, and whether it be the HVAC system, the ice floor, lighting control replacement, retractable seating, sports lights, fire alarm system and update. And the one item of difference that you would find in the other slide is as it relates to the ADA compliant restrooms. And as you are aware, when, relative to code and ADA, is that those codes have changed since 1994. And through working through with Gateway and with from an ADA perspective, we'll be compliant here upon the completion of the project, which will all be finished here in September of 2019. And then this, again, I just referred to relative to the lease outline itself. And then just lastly, knowing that the question may be out there as well, we're working in conjunction with the county and the city and Gateway's Community Benefits Agreement. This project was targeted on behalf of all constituencies as a prospective showcase project relative to meeting diversity and inclusion goals. And this is a report as of April of 2019. And the good news is, which has been the case throughout the entirety of the project, we're not only meeting those goals, but we're exceeding them across the board. So that continues to progress, and we have no reason to believe that that won't be the case upon conclusion of the project in September of 2019. So open for any questions you may have.
Questions? So, looking at that last slide, can we get that back up, please? So, what is the meaning of the two colors on the slide?
Oh, I'm sorry to explain that. So the red are the goals, and the gold actually represents the actual numbers. So in other wors, whether it be Cuyahoga County workforce participation, the goal was 25%, the actual number is 52%. Sorry that wasn't denoted, but.
And when you talked about the process of submitting capital repairs to Gateway, am I correct that Gateway does not have the discretion to say, we're going to do this capital repair, but we're not going to do that capital repair? As I understand it, Gateway's role is to decide whether it meets the contractual definition of what constitutes a major repair. And if it does, they're required to approve it. And if it's not, they're required not to approve it. Is that correct?
That's our understanding, yes. There's a agreement relative to major capital repairs. We go through a process, it's vetted, and then ultimately goes to the board for review and approval or not.
Are there any capital repairs for the arena that are needed but are not on this approved list and either are in process of currently being considered or would be considered in the future, or will this list kind of take care of what's needed?
For the foreseeable near future, this takes care of the preponderance of what's there. I mean, we have one other item relative to vertical transportation, but that is a smaller item in the scheme of things and something that'll be, evaluated here as in the future. But I would say the good news when you look at items like the HVAC system, which we managed to cobble through for 25 years, that the replacement of that system will certainly most likely make its way through not only the lease term, but beyond that, which is 2034.
Okay. Right. Okay, fine. Okay. Yes.
Oh, escalators, elevators.
Questions?
Yeah, of this one.
Councilman Jones, followed by Baker. Are there others? Okay, followed by Conwell.
Thank you. First, I'd like to commend you on our report. If I go back years, when we first took office, we didn't get this type of information. So it was a process over time, and you had people outside picketing. People remember those things, and not to say it won't happen again, but we certainly have. I think we made progress, and this was brilliant without even being asked, and the numbers are strong. When I see 58% small business enterprises, those businesses right here in Cuyahoga County have gotten more than half of the work here. In fact, maybe you can remind me, my question is, what is the actual dollar amount that these percentages are based off of?
That I can't tell you offhand. It's something that we can certainly work to get, but I can tell you that we have monthly meetings in conjunction with the county, with the city and Gateway, and going through all of this. So as we're going through our process and expenditures and otherwise, it's not a unilateral process. It's actually done in collaboration with all the different entities. But I couldn't tell you the exact spend number with that, but that's something that we can certainly work to get you.
Again, the original transformation dollars were about 140 million?
Yeah, originally 140 million, now 185 million, yes.
185?
Yes. That, the additional 45 million is privately borne by our organization.
It's obviously a part of that money that these numbers come off of.
Yeah, it's all part of the transformation
I
process.
would like to know that answer offline at some point.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Ms. Baker?
Thank you. Just, I guess I'm just curious, the major capital repair, replace, and update, the major capital repair and replace are pretty, you can understand that, but how do you balance the update? How do you balance what it is that you're going to be paying for that will perhaps change more for aesthetics than anything else and not really be a capital repair or replace? How do you balance the dollars and the percentages of what you spend in updating versus the capital repair and replace?
I'm not really sure what you mean when you say aesthetics, but when you look at HVAC system, when you look at fire systems, lighting, these are effectively, not unlike your house, you have items that, effectively no longer serve their useful life. So relative to that, so if you look at those major capital repairs, those items, let's use this as an example. There certainly have been more efficient HVAC systems that were in existence 10 years after this was put in, or 15 years, or 20 years as it relates to that. It gets to a point of when the useful life of that item, which we ultimately had a portion of that fail at one juncture, created the necessity for that to take place. And then we work with Gateway. They have a third party, independent third party who vets these, who is part of that. And I will also say too, the Gateway team is in our building as well. These are major public assets, and working hand in hand to ensure their viability, longevity, and how we extend the useful life of the building as it is versus having to face a new venue.
Yeah. If I may, just maybe to clarify, there's a line item here that says multi-level seating space replacements, updates, and reconfigurations. That's different than an HVA system. So that's where I guess I'm going and just getting some kind of clarification as to how does that differ from elevator and sidewalks and window replacements? How do you balance the updates and reconfigurations of spaces and call it capital improvement?
Yeah, well, I'll use as an example, so the retractable seating, in terms of that space, we had a system that was failing, didn't work. And, that was an item that we ultimately replaced, that enabled us within that space to continue to be able, and if you've been in the arena, you may know where the floor can extend or come back. And that's the retractable portion, but that would be an example.
That's it for now. Thank you.
Councilwoman Conwell.
Through the chair, who is responsible from the county to check minority business and workforce inclusion goals? To check the slide that you showed us?
I'm looking for our team who works on this daily. We can speak to.
Councilman, we've had a transition in the inclusion office. So Michelle Pomerantz, Janae Holly have taken over that responsibility. I think they've just started to work with the CAVS team, being apprised of the inclusion goals and results and process.
Janae Holly. Prior to that was an outside, we had contracted outside, didn't we?
We had another staff person who was based in Public Works who oversaw. He left within the last year.
What was his name?
If I'm not, Louise.
Cartagena.
Yeah, Cartagena, yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. That's all.
Okay. Councilman Sean.
I'm looking at the list that we received on the 2-page, didn't have a lot of chances to study it, but where's, unless I'm missing it, is the roof there someplace on the 2-page list?
Say two, but no, the roof is not on there.
But the roof was on the 14 as being a critical item of $6.2 million. What happened to that?
The roof is mostly funded already
Through what source?
through the excess excise taxes that have flowed to Gateway over the years, as well as there was some, I think there was some allocated bond fund money from the 2015 issue, some overestimations of cost, project costs that were allocated to the roof project. But I believe the roof is almost done.
Yes. It's almost complete, yes.
So we're spending the same amount of money on this, but yet on these 2 sheets of paper, but yet the roof is, the $6 million has already been covered. Actually, we're spending more, and the roof has been covered.
If I can, and I'll attempt to answer. So there was a previous bond issue, a portion of, basically that's being refinanced, I guess would be a way to explain that, of which certain items such as the roof were addressed as part of that. This bond issue, which is the new portion, is addressing additional items that were not addressed earlier during that issue.
Yeah, that's, I'm just trying to match up. We said we should compare these 2 lists, and that's all I was doing, was comparing them, and they aren't matching up.
Yeah, there's, we did our best with a crystal ball when asked back in 2014 what would be items that would need to be addressed, and with that, provided that information. And really, the essence of it is that if you look at the projects being done, have been done to date or being done now, effectively are on that list.
Precast concrete, exterior precast concrete, where does that show up? I'm just trying to go to your list that you're doing the cost justification analysis on the bonds.
Yeah, there are, again, maybe just to restate, so there was a previous bond issue that covered different items. And then this bond issue is to cover the items that are denoted here with this, here, I can go back to this page.
I'm just trying to add up the 2. This is $12 million, so now over 25% was on this list a few years ago, and it's not on this list. This is the one we just got 2 minutes ago or 5 minutes ago.
Yeah, no, and I apologize for that. I thought you had a chance to review that, so that's why it's a little bit difficult to.
Can you speak up, please? I can't.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, so I apologize for, so all my previous remarks probably didn't make a whole lot of sense, so I apologize for that.
I'm sure they did. I'm just trying to match. You asked me to compare it. That's all I was doing was comparing it. It looks, I'm missing 25% that was on one sheet only a few years ago, and it's not on this sheet.
So in the 2015 bond issue, 23 million was funded, correct?
Yes.
Yeah, 23. And then in this bond issue, approximately 39 and a half is going to be funded. So now we're looking at, not quite, it's going to be over the 65 million, but pretty close. And
I'm just going through what at least my back of the envelope is that in less than 5 years, the HVA system that we're looking at putting in is going to cost at least over 33 to 40% more than what the one was that was forecast. Can you give me background on what was going on? Why the HVA system in just 5 years is now 40% higher than?
Yeah, we did our best estimates at that point, given where we were at that point in time, and going through the process with Gateway and through that third party and ours, we ultimately came to that conclusion with the system. So in certain cases, a number of the cases, the items have come in less than what was projected. In certain cases, they've come in more.
And in fairness, we did have this. So I know that other people didn't see it. In fairness, I believe it's in our file, in our electronic file. So we need to put you on the hot spot, see on that from that standpoint. But having the total package in front of us was what I was trying to compare it to.
Councilman Sean, may I ask a follow-up question?
Sure, absolutely.
On the increase in price on the HVAC, was it more a matter of the same set of items increased in price, or was it more a matter of you decided that the scope that was in the original estimate was not sufficient and that you needed to expand the scope of what you needed to accomplish?
If I can, I'll have our Senior Vice President of Facility Operations, Anthony Bonavita. He can address that specifically.
Okay, please introduce yourself and respond to the question.
Good afternoon. I'm Anthony Bonavita. I'm the Senior Vice President of Facilities, and I was here as part of the team that pulled together the 2013 numbers. The culmination of your answer is we didn't understand the full scope and magnitude of what we were going to have to replace. It was as we were trying to pull these numbers together, we went and looked at comparable buildings. We had an assessment come in. And then when we really got into the nuts and bolts of the system itself, we realized we had misunderstood the amount of work it was going to take to actually replace the system. And so therefore, there was increased cost in equipment. And primarily what was misunderstood was the amount of labor that was going to be involved. And so to Len's point, that was one that we certainly didn't have enough information at the time that we presented these numbers. We thought we had enough of a scale between the 55 and 65 million. Turns out we're going to be pretty close. And again, to his point, we're 2 years beyond what we thought we were going to be on this project. So there's some escalation in there as well. Hopefully that answers your question.
Yes, that was helpful. Councilman Schron.
My fear, seeing how you're up here, is the same that you just raised as far as in less, or 4.5 years from the time this presentation to the one we're currently getting. What says that we have all the facts today, and if we're going to be tapping our financial well, and we're going to be tapping it pretty deep with this bond issue, that we don't have it right in another 4.5 years or 5 years?
Well, as it relates to these projects, we're going to have, we have them priced right now. We're executing on them. So it's not an uncertainty at this point. We've actually gone through the process with Gateway. We've actually gone through the vetting process. We've actually priced these projects and gone to market and are executing on them. So there's not uncertainty as it relates to those projects. So when you see these in the 40.5 million as an example, those are numbers of projects that are priced and being executed on or have already been executed on.
I'm sorry, I wasn't very specific on that. Sorry, Mr. Komorowski. Not only are there items that are not on one list that are appearing on the other, vice versa? Is there some concerns, and there are some from mine, that when we go to the well and use our funding source, that we're not going to have another chance to do that in another 5 years if you're missing an item right now?
Well, again, and all we can do is give our best information based on the information at this point. But we've addressed a significant majority of major capital repairs in terms of what we're aware at this point. They relatively coincide, which was with what was anticipated when asked the question back in 2014. At the end of it, we're going to have an arena that's going to have a significant amount of those major capital repairs addressed, not to mention renovated in other fashions to keep, to give us a competitive building for the foreseeable future.
I'm sorry, scoreboards, I didn't mean to cut you off. Scoreboards are factored into here because as we know that those things change, the technology changes dramatically in a 10-year period.
Yeah, I mean, we're right now, we have a scoreboard that's competitive, and we've that functional technology before, in which we had parts that weren't even in existence anymore.
Sure.
So we have a board that's competitive, and that's been addressed as part of this.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Conwell.
Sort of a follow-up. So the Cavs are responsible for maintenance, repairs, anything less than 500,000. There's 3 systems on here that looks like there should be some routine maintenance. And going forward, I'm assuming that you guys have kept up your maintenance agreements with the escalator replacement, the HVAC, and the ice floor and chiller plant. If this goes forward, the bond and all that, and the repairs are done, the capital improvements, what are your maintenance agreements? Do you have those maintenance agreements going forward for those major systems?
Well, first of all, we're responsible for maintenance. I'll say on behalf of Anthony and his team, and I'll say this as well for the other major sports facility in town. You have ownership groups that are, I would say, great stewards of these facilities in terms of the investment made back in terms of repairs, maintenance, operating, and otherwise. So we often get the comment about our arena looking a lot younger than it does versus other buildings that are 10, 15 years younger. So to that extent, we diligently maintain, all facets of the arena, which has been the case for the first 25 years of the facility's history. And it's our lease obligation as well. And we welcome that and embrace it and have, exceeded what's required.
Can you send council the maintenance plans that you've had prior up to this point and how you've routinely maintained the facilities?
We can, I guess, in terms of, so each item or each part of it has, regular regimens of maintenance, which we also work in accordance with our partners at Gateway. I don't know if there's well, I'll let you speak to that.
Well, I guess dating back to 1994, I would say, and I wasn't here, that they made a commitment to maintain these facilities. Having been around the league for a little bit, I would tell you that the commitment that the ownership group, both from Gordon's time to now Dan's time, has been incredible in what they've done as it relates to investment. So to your point, we have service agreements on the HVAC. That system should have been out of its useful life back about 5 years ago, and it lasted all the way through 4 NBA finals, which and also running the ice plant at the same time. We consistently look at, we just had a budget review today where we consistently invest. So to answer your question, we can certainly give you a list of the vendors that we have, but every single item on this list is now going to have another useful life of 20 years plus. So the goal for us was to maintain this asset in the same fashion that they started back in 1994.
Okay, so you're stating that if we move forward with it, 20 years, this should last, but there should be some kind of routine maintenance in order to get to that 20 and also to extend.
There will be. There's ongoing, there will be an absolute, we protect the asset at a very, very high level.
And that's all I want to see, is how you do that, especially on these 3 major systems.
Yeah,
We will work to get you information on how we're maintaining the HVAC system and otherwise.
Thank you.
Yes, Ms. Baker.
Just to go back again to the major capital improvements, certainly are specific in HVAC and lighting control and fire alarm systems and ADA restrooms. Can you tell me what the suite renovations are in capital improvements and what the club lounge capital improvement is? It seems pretty broad. That's under the Progressive Field approved major capital item.
The club lounge is that area down the right field line of the ballpark where there's sort of a sort of like a patio or a porch where the seating is just above the lower bowl. It was built when the park opened, and it has a separate restaurant and dining and lounge area that is immediately behind it. It was rather dated, needed a lot of rework, and so we completely redid the club lounge in this past year, opened up in the beginning of this year.
If I may, Chair, and the suite renovations?
Suite renovations are the existing suites that are located in the ballpark. We, not want to go too granular here, but when we opened up the ballpark, we had about 130 suites. We've really never needed that many suites, amazingly enough, except for a brief period of time in the 90s We've been gradually contracting, revising, and redoing our suites. Today, we're probably down to somewhere in the 85, 90 range, and we probably could still go a lot less. On top of the redevelopment of the suites, we have changed their sizes. The public's taste relative to the use of suites has changed. And where we can't contract it in a way that is useful for some other purpose. So for example, if you've been to the ballpark, there's a place down the right field line called the Kids Clubhouse. It's really what used to be about 7 suites. Today it's a play area for children and is one of our more popular areas. The portion of the suites that have qualified for major capital repairs have largely and exclusively been things that would be considered operational capital repairs, they would be the glasswork, electrical, the HVAC, the plumbing, the reconfiguration of them, the design, decor, refurbishing of them have all been exclusively covered by the Indians and have not been major capital repairs.
Thank you for that explanation.
Okay. We have received a request for a citizen comment. This is actually not exactly a public comment. This is witness testimony during a hearing on a piece of legislation. So I would like to call forward Will Tarter, and I would ask if you would try to complete your presentation in 3 minutes. And welcome to the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, President Brady, and to members of County Council. First, thank you for the opportunity to address this very important piece of legislation. My name is William Tarter Jr. I'm speaking today as a private taxpayer and not representative of my employer or any other civic organization. Since the passage of the sin tax, I have attended on my own personal time most meetings of the Gateway Economic Development Corporation ever since. In the past, I've written about the projected maintenance shortfalls that the stadium faces. The county splits the sin tax proceeds equally between the 3 facilities. The sin tax brings in between $13 and $14 million annually. Spread out over 20 years, the county conservatively expects to spend about $87 million per stadium. The current expenditures, plus the capital maintenance projections over the next 5 years that Councilman Trot alluded to, means that the county faces a maintenance shortfall to maintain the facilities far before the sin tax revenue comes in. The legislation today would increase the bonds issued by $40 million to be reimbursed by the sin tax revenues. As a taxpayer, this raises several questions regarding this legislation that, if I wasn't late, I would have answered today. The first question is, why are we issuing $40 million in bonds? The sin tax revenue is not enough to maintain the stadiums, as we just reviewed. And if the sin tax is equally divided among the 3 facilities on a yearly basis, it's not enough to keep pace with the current rate of spending. Yet the county is on the hook for any capital maintenance on the facilities over $500,000. Can't the money be paid back as the revenue becomes available? The decision to pay the money back by issuing bond debt appears completely optional. It gets the money back to the team sooner, but it has the potential impact by paying back the bonds of principal plus interest to have a potential negative impact on the long-term revenue mechanisms that the county uses to maintain the facilities. Question 2, how much does the county expect to pay back principal plus interest on those bonds from the sin tax revenue? Knowing that the potential fiscal impact on the bond sale means that the county will better understand exactly the financial shortfall that it inevitably will face. Question number 3, because of the maintenance shortfall, what is the long-term solution to stadium maintenance that we know is coming? Question number 4, the legislation calls for the creation and implementation of a property tax in order to back the sin tax bonds. And yes, these bonds would be paid back by Syntex revenue. But from my observation, these completely optional bonds would be issued in the form of a property tax. And the county already has several major decisions in the next coming months regarding taxation on property owners for other programs. So why are we proposing an additional property tax on homeowners? And that leads me back to the question of why we're issuing these optional bonds in the first place. I thank the chair for the opportunity to ask these questions and look forward to any questions or comments you might have.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
Hi, Maggie Keenan, OBM. Just if I may respond to Will's statement, which I appreciate always, as always. I do want to note, though, that this is not an additional property tax that the county is proposing. The county is guaranteed 1.45 mils of inside millage that we have been using since forever, at least as long as I've been here, but we allocate it between the general fund and our bond retirement fund. So we have two general obligation bonds that are maturing 2005, 2009, and the next one this year and then one next year. So we can switch that allocation, which I've proposed to do in the tax budget that is coming to council now. But the issuance of these bonds in particular are not going to have any impact on the taxes paid by homeowners.
So it's a pledge of existing revenue, not an increase in taxes. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. I would ask if Mr. Komorowski could comment on the practicality of having the Cavaliers' investment in these improvements paid over time as excise tax revenues come in, as opposed to having it being fully repaid forthwith through the issuance of bonds.
Well, first of all, just to respond to relative to major capital repairs, the major capital repairs happen when they're needed. It's not, we don't necessarily have the flexibility, nor does any of the venues to say our HVAC system, we can just summarily push that off another 5 years if it's failing. And as it calls for in the lease, the lease, which we're honoring every aspect of our lease, the lease calls for that if there is a major capital repair, then that is to be executed upon, whether it be both implemented as far as completed, but then also, relative to funding for that matter, it's not an optional item to be funded down the road when those, based on the excise tax. The lease itself is silent to any funding source whatsoever. It more speaks to the obligation that exists. And so we've followed the process, as is the case with our lease, and fully compliant with our lease. We're funding all of our other obligations associated with that. And in this case, you have certain items that need to be executed upon. And I'm not the expert to speak to this. I think Mr. Franz can speak to it more eloquently and more appropriately. But you have, in this case, where there was not a source, there is a source that's being utilized, much like other sources that are out there from the county's perspective or the city's perspective. Those are bonded to be able to address needs that are inherent now and then repaid over time versus, being done a little over time when the need already exists now.
So what you're saying is that we're contractually obligated by lease to pay for major capital repairs in a timely manner.
That's our agreement with the lease, yes.
Okay, thank you. Councilman Tron.
But we're only contracted, I believe, to pay for it in a timely manner, too. If the money's not there, we're not going to go dipping into the general fund to make those. Is that a correct statement?
For our understanding, we've signed a lease that basically obligates us for items that we're responsible for. And in the case of the major capital repairs, that's Gateway's responsibility at that time when the obligation is ultimately repaired.
And if the funds are not there currently in the account from Gateway, what's the alternative at that point?
That's not a question that we can answer, because at that point, we're prepared to meet every aspect of our lease obligation, and we do so. And ultimately, we work with our partners you enter into a lease that all parties are going to meet their obligations. And that would just be the expectations, we all meet our obligations.
And then with the ADA restrooms, why wasn't that a requirement to be done when we put, I think the total package was going to come out to what, $240 million over the life of the bonds for the improvements that went on over at the Cube. Why didn't they require the ADA to be done in that package?
Well, first of all, we went into the project working with the project itself. As is the case, you'll work with the ADA to make sure the building is compliant and meets those needs. And as part of that review, the ADA, through the parties we work with, pointed out that was a need that had to be done. And so it wasn't something that we necessarily had visibility to at that juncture and point in time. And it is a major capital repair regardless. It's not a renovation, it's a major capital repair. But you go through a review of all of that, work with from an ADA standpoint to make sure the building's compliant, which we're doing.
And then during the conversations about the building itself, we heard a lot about useful life of arenas and sports stadiums. And by the time you add in 20 years on top of the 25, that puts it at 45 years. It sounds like it's going to be way past any of the things we were being told a couple of years ago. So we're putting renovations in that I think we just heard from the facilities manager, that some of these are 20-year improvements or enhancements that we're putting into a building that's going to be 45 years old when it runs through its useful life with these improvements.
Well, if I can, I believe, address that. So what he is stating, so I'm using the HVAC system as an example. That's a system that, has a useful life, 17, 18 years. We were able to extend that useful life beyond that through maintenance and other means. We have a new HVAC system, which, our lease term goes through 2034. For all practical purposes, it should extend beyond, when that lease term is, and I think that's what he's referring to.
Okay, I just was going back to the fact that we were having pointed out to us the number of stadiums and the number of arenas that were built, torn down, and rebuilt all in this same 35, 40 year period of time that we're talking about here. And it just seems like, is there a risk we're putting in monies into something that you or a subsequent owner or on either side might be asking us to tear these same things down here before these projects are done?
Yeah, we first of all, we would welcome the opportunity to give you a tour of the transformation itself at some point in time, but we feel that everything we've talked about going this, and obviously separate of this matter, which is major capital repairs, but the transformation itself is going to exceed expectations as it relates to the community in terms of the facility and its ability to compete for the long term. So. And again, applaud this leadership group along with many others in the city for being able to be good stewards of the public's dollars relative to these public facilities and not having to face a $800 million facility or a $600 million facility or a $900 million facility, which is what's the case in many other communities.
Thank you.
I just have to say that Mr. Komorowski is totally on the right track. If we accept the commonly put forward notion that these facilities can only last 20 or 25 years, Cleveland is not going to be a 3-sports team city. There's just not enough money available to replace these facilities every 20 to 25 years. I would point out that Fenway Park is over 100 years old and still going. Our path forward, if we're going to continue to do sports the way we've been doing them, is to find ways to make these facilities viable for a much longer length of time what is commonly being put out there. A question for Mr. France.
Yes, sir.
Can you give us an estimate as to the total cost of capital plus interest for the life of the projected bonds?
So for the refunding, we are refunding the 2015 bonds. Through that refunding and the use of other monies, we are saving about $1.5 million a year. So a little over $12 million over the life of the deal. That has a final maturity in 2027. For the new money bonds, we're funding $39.5 million. My estimates are at about 3%, which equates to about $21 million in interest cost.
So you're talking just over 60 million for the total, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, thank you. Okay, other questions? Well, not seeing other questions, I would invite if anybody feels that that we need more information or there's unanswered questions that have to be answered before we can vote on it. I would ask if anyone has such concerns to bring them forward. Otherwise, I'm going to ask for a motion for second reading. Anything?
Chair, with a number of people just having read this document that came to us from our financial advisor, is there a hurry?
I think I think we want to move reasonably expeditiously, but if we want to take time and have one more meeting on this legislation, we could also do that. Ms. Stevens.
Because I am the rookie on this one, and because it is big money,
Ms. Stevens, is your microphone on?
I'm sorry, you're right, my microphone was not on. What time frame were you asking this to go to the second reading?
Well, if everybody felt ready, we could vote on it today and pass it out of the committee into second reading, and then it would be up for final passage in 2 weeks. If we wanted to take a little more time, we could have a second hearing. It would be presumably in 2 weeks from now, and at that time we could, at our discretion, either pass it out to second reading, or if we wanted to keep it on essentially the same expedited time frame, we could pass it at that time under second reading suspension. So we have a choice.
I would request that we have at least 2 more weeks, so that I have the same problem Jack does in trying to match these numbers up. So I was glad to hear that I wasn't alone. But I think I can get it done in 2 weeks.
Okay, so having heard multiple requests, I'm going to support those requests, and we're going to hold this legislation with the intent of getting the questions answered and hopefully moving it out of committee in 2 weeks. Okay, and with that, I'm going to transfer the leadership over to the council president to conduct the rest of the committee of the whole. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'm not surprised that there might be a few questions that need to be answered. A lot of us have lived with this project since 1990, and we do owe our bills, and we do intend to pay them. But we do understand that members of this panel need to be satisfied in order to be able to fulfill that obligation. So thank you again, Mr. Chairman. We are going to go into executive session if we have the votes. All meetings of the Cuyahoga County Council are open to the public under the Ohio open meeting laws. Under that law, council may go into executive session during a meeting for specifically authorized purposes. During executive session, council confers outside the hearing of the public. Council may not make any decisions about any matters in executive session. All decisions are made in public. This afternoon, the council's committee of the whole will go into executive session to discuss collective bargaining matters and pending or imminent litigation. During this time, our live stream will be down. We will ask all those not needed for the executive session to remain in council chambers. Council members will convene in the adjacent room A and will re-enter the meeting once the executive session is ended. Is there a motion to go into executive session for the purposes of discussing collective bargaining matters and pending or imminent litigation?
I so move.
Second.
And seconded. Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Moving to executive session, Mr. Tuma?
Yes.
Mr. Gallagher? Mr. Schrun? Yes. Ms. Conwell? Yes. Mr. Jones? Yes. Ms. Brown? Yes. Ms. Stevens?
Yes.
Ms. Simon? Yes. Ms. Baker? Yes. Mr. Miller?
Yes.
Council President Brady?
Yes.
Motion carries.
The ayes have it. We will adjourn for the executive committee session.